Welcome to Beat Diabetes. On today's episode, I'll be talking about my second experience with the Dexcom Stelo. This is the box that it comes in, and this is what you get in the box. And you screw off the top, and you put it against the back of your arm. At least that's where they tell you to put it. And you punch this little button. I show you exactly how to do it and a lot more of the details of how this works in my first report about it. So I'll put a link in the description, so if you want to know more about it, go to that first video. This one is going to be kind of a follow-up based on my second experience, and sadly, it wasn't that great. If you watched my first video, I was glowing, and I was just gushing practically over the Dexcom Stelo. I thought it was wonderful. It worked beautiful. It kept accurate numbers compared to my regular glucose meter, and I was like, boy, this is wonderful. The only thing I didn't much like was the price. The other con I listed was the fact that you can get obsessed with constantly checking it. Well, guess what? I did not have that problem of being obsessed with it this time. In fact, I went entire days practically ignoring it altogether. So what was the problem this time? Well, to my shock and horror, it was about 20 points, milligrams per deciliter, off from my glucose meter. It was reading about 20 points higher at the beginning. Now, it didn't stay that way. It kind of lowered and got a little bit closer. So after a couple of days, it was 15 points higher. And finally, over a couple of more days and for the rest of its life, it was about 12 points higher. So it did improve a bit, but it never got very accurate. Now, you might be saying, well, yeah, but Dennis, your glucose meter, your regular glucose meter that you stick your finger with, that's probably the problem. Well, I've been using that glucose meter, and it is a Freestyle Precision Neo. I've been using it for years, and it is accurate as far as I can tell. I mean, maybe not perfectly accurate, but if you take the numbers you get from that, if I do, and I average them and plug that into a formula to find out my A1C, it pretty much nails it. And it just gets right close to where I get if I go to the laboratory and get an official A1C done, which is around 5.0, somewhere in that range. And to my shock, when I first tested this, it was about the CGM, Charlie as I call him, the Dexcom Stelo, was about 20 points higher. Now, why am I talking so much about these Dexcom Stelos? Because these are the first CGMs you can get without a prescription. It's almost like an over-the-counter device. There's no reason why you can't get any CGM that way, other than somebody's just stubborn and not very bright, because there's absolutely no reason why ordinary people, ordinary Dennises and Joes and Susans and Marys and Benedictas can't go to Walmart or go to the pharmacy and get themselves a CGM without needing to go to the doctor. So 20 points higher at first, eventually got close to 12. At one point, when I was doing some fasting, it was actually 30 points higher than my regular glucose meter. So that was just terrible. As a result of that, I just didn't have the motivation to check it that often. I probably didn't check it half as often, didn't check the app and see where I was. Maybe I didn't do it maybe half as much as I did the first time around. Now, granted, some of that may be the fact I was getting used to it and it wasn't as novel. But part of it was just the yuckiness of looking at that number and knowing it was off and it was high. I guess I would have liked it better if it was on the low side. But it was high consistently. It was never, ever lower than my regular glucose meter. It was always higher, and we're not talking about 2 or 3 points. We're talking about 12, 15, 20, one time even 30 points higher. Well, I trust my glucose meter. It's been a tried and true friend. Mike has. I call him Mike for a lot of years, and he just seems to nail it. So I've become very comfortable with that type of glucose meter, and this one, it's easy to use. You just check your app. You don't even have to scan anything. First CGM I ever used, you had to scan it, but this one you don't scan, you just look at it. But the numbers were so off, and yes, I'm smart enough that Not that I'm that smart, but I know enough math to know I can deduct 20 points or 15 points or 12 points and come up with where I ought to be, but I just don't like doing that. And I don't like the initial yuckiness of looking at something that says I'm 120 when I know I'm 105, or something that says I'm 110 when I know I'm in the 90s. I just don't like that. And it kind of took away the motivation. And I knew I could always go to my regular glucose meter and get a much more accurate number. So, another thing about this was the two patches that I used, the two sensors, they came in the same package. I mean, in the same box. So we're not talking about I ordered one year and the other another year, or I got them from two different places. These came presumably from the same factory, same warehouse, same time, got them in the mail in the same box, and yet one reads almost dead on even with my glucose meter, and the other is like 15 points higher. And so I didn't like that at all. I mean, I'm kind of persnickety. I'm kind of a curmudgeon, and kind of I just don't like things that are that inaccurate. My average, the first time around with the first Stelo sensor, was 95, which equals, when you plug it into a formula, about a 4.9 A1C. So that was just right on, just almost exactly with what I was getting with my regular glucose meter. Second time around with the second patch, it was an average of 107, which equals, plug it into a converter, about a 5.4 A1C. So half of a point higher on the A1C, 4.9 first patch, 5.4 second patch. You say, well, Dennis, you were probably eating a lot more carbs, or you ate too many donuts. No, I didn't. I was eating pretty much the same way. The only thing was, I think there was one time for a YouTube experiment, I did eat a regular tortilla. I tested 3 types of tortillas, and I ate one regular one, and it did bump it up. That was the only time I was out of range, by the way. You can set your range from like 70 to 140, and according to this one, I was at like 145 that particular time. But otherwise, I was eating the same exact way. So not real happy about that. Now, so what's the problem? Well, it looks to me like you can say it's one of two issues. Either these CGMs, there's a terrible problem with quality control, and they're just not made very well, so one is good and the other is bad. That's a possibility, and I won't rule it out. I'm no scientist, I'm no engineer, I haven't done an investigation of thousands of these to be able to say much. I am saying it's either the fact that there's poor quality control, or it makes a huge difference where you locate your patch, where you put it on initially. Now, the Dexcom company tells you put it under your upper arm. And that's what I did both cases. But obviously, I didn't measure it with a micrometer. I didn't measure it, precisely. I won't say that I got within 1 millimeter of the same position each time. It was probably a couple inches off. Maybe that was the difference. And some people say, well, I put mine, I hear about it in strange places, on my stomach, on my thigh. The Dexcom people will tell you put it under your upper arm. And that's what I did. But it may be that because these don't measure your actual blood, they measure your so-called interstitial fluid, that it makes a huge difference where it gets positioned. That could be the problem. I honestly don't know, but I was somewhat disturbed by that. The result was a lack of motivation. I just didn't have the motivation, and I kept going back to Mike the meter, my regular glucose meter, my Freestyle Precision Neo, and getting numbers that I was used to getting, and numbers that I felt were quite accurate, rather than looking at this. I did compare them several times, and they were always off. I mean, every single time. It was never in single digits. It was always double digits. As I said, usually around 15 to 12. Ended up with a 107 average versus a 95 first time around. Now, I mentioned this before that I was disappointed with this second patch, and I've had some of you leave comments saying that with some of these, not the Stelo, but some of the ones you can get by prescription, you can calibrate them. So you can compare them to a meter that you trust, a regular glucose meter where it actually tests blood, not interstitial fluid. You can get what you figure is your accurate number, and you can calibrate it and set that thing so that the next time it will reflect the number you got or the level you got with your glucose meter. To me, but you can't do that with the Stelo. To me, that's what they need to do, number one. Make it to where it can be calibrated. And secondly, my suggestion, Dexcom, if you're listening, my suggestion is create your own glucose meter that you can verify is dead on accurate or about as accurate as they can be, and include it with this and give us instructions about calibrating it initially with a very accurate glucose meter. And yeah, I wouldn't mind paying an extra $5 if you could do that, maybe even 10, so that we can calibrate it and we don't have to look and see numbers that are off. Now, a number of you reported to me and left comments and said, yeah, mine's 20 points higher. Some said mine's 20 points lower. Some said, no, mine seems to be right on. It seems to be right even, which was my first experience with that first patch. So it's kind of all over the map right now. These are useful for people that want general patterns. For example, if I ate 3 donuts versus 3 avocados, it wouldn't matter whether I used a regular glucose meter or a CGM or anything else. They're all going to show that the donuts spike glucose a lot and the avocados don't. So you can see patterns, you can see trends, you can see spikes, you can see all of that. What you cannot apparently see for now is accuracy with every single sensor that they send you. And when you're paying $100 for 2 sensors, which is 2 weeks per sensor, basically 15 days per sensor, about a month, and one of them is wacky, it just takes all the motivation to go and buy a bunch more. Who would I recommend this for? I would recommend these CGMs for people that are just getting started and you haven't done a lot of testing. They'll open your eyes for sure, even if they're not so accurate. One thing I will say about the Dexcom Stelo, it was fairly accurate within itself, although it even took a few days to kind of get down to where it decided it was going to settle in. And where it settled in was about 12 points difference between it and my regular glucose meter. It took about, several days, 3-4 days maybe. Well, if you only get 15 days for this thing to work, and then it's going to die on you, which it will, and 3 or 4 days, it's kind of adjusting itself and getting used to how it's supposed to read and getting even close to accurate, then you've just lost 3 or 4 days. And now you're not talking about 15 days per patch. You're talking about 11 days, 12 days maybe. So that is a problem. I like the idea of calibration. I think almost everybody agrees that regular glucose meters tend to be more accurate. Some are better than others. The one thing this is accurate, though, once it settles in, it's accurate within itself. In other words, I was never surprised. It was kind of floating around 107. I said 107 was my average. Well, I saw that myself. In fact, a number of 107s when I did test. If I hadn't eaten in a while, that was kind of the standard. It was like, okay, another 107. I would think, okay, do my subtraction, figure out what it was, and say, well, that's not so bad. But my mind never got over the shock of seeing that 107. It's like, I shouldn't be at 107. Mike the meter would never tell me I was at 107 if I haven't eaten in 4 hours and my last meal was a very low-carb meal. I should never be at 107. And yet this stupid thing is telling me I'm at 107. So I didn't like that a bit. They'll get better for sure. Everything is going to tend to get better. And they'll get cheaper. So there's good news ahead, but none of us can wait. Most of you watching me are in your 50s, 60s, 70s. You can't wait 30 years for them to get better and cheaper, and maybe it won't take that long. But you have to deal with what you have right now. So I'm not holding my breath until they get better and cheaper. They will eventually. But for right now, I'm going to stick with Mike the meter. Mostly, I'm not saying I won't buy another one of these. I will, almost for sure. But not anytime soon. I may wait 6 months, maybe wait a year and see if they're any better. See if the two at least match. Now, some people have said the Abbott Lingo, which is also a prescription-free, over-the-counter type sensor that you can buy, CGM, they said that works better. Maybe it does. It was not my impression that you could buy those in the U.S. I thought that was for Britain and parts of Europe, but maybe you can. I went on the Lingo website and found out that their app only worked with Apple iPhones. It was an iPhone-only app, so that would leave me out because I use the Android. Who is this for? Well, it's going to be helpful for people that are just starting to learn, as long as you get yourself a good regular glucose meter and do a little comparison and know what you're dealing with and how far off this CGM is. If you've recently been diagnosed with diabetes and you've just discovered this channel, let me recommend that you go to our Uploads page, which will give you access to every diabetic video we've posted since we began. As you work your way through all our videos, I believe you'll find the help you need. A link to our Uploads page is in the description.